Pipeline Studio is about understanding your workflow and knowing when it's running smoothly. Once an idea is understood, something important happens. It stops asking for attention, not because it's been completed, but because it's been placed correctly. This is where processing quietly earns its keep. You're no longer reacting to the idea. You're no longer circling it. You're no longer carrying it just to make sure it doesn't disappear. You know what it is. And that knowledge changes how you move. Some ideas, once processed, ask to be acted on. They gain direction. They feel specific. They create a sense of pull. Others don't. They settle. They don't disappear. They simply stop demanding motion. This is the part people often misunderstand. Letting an idea rest isn't avoidance. Releasing an idea isn't failure, it's accuracy. Processing isn't about producing outcome, it's about producing truth. Truth about scope, truth about relevance, truth about timing. When that truth is missing, people substitute effort. They stay busy, they stay active, they stay in motion. But motion without clarity creates friction instead of progress. That's why so many systems feel exhausting, not because they're complex, but because they're filled with unresolved intent. Processing clears that intent. It tells you which ideas belong in motion and which belong in storage, which deserve structure and which only needed acknowledgement. Once that separation exists, action becomes simpler, not easier, but cleaner. You're no longer trying to force momentum, you're responding to it. This is where the pipeline finally feels supportive. Capture took the load off your mind. Containment stopped the drift. Processing created definition. Only after those three does execution make sense. Only then does work feel aligned instead of reactive. If you skip this step, everything feels urgent. If you honor it, urgency becomes optional. That's the quiet power of processing. It doesn't speed you up, it removes resistance. And when resistance is gone, movement happens naturally. That's where real flow begins. Not at the start of an idea, but at the moment you understand what that idea is asking for and what it isn't. Because when ideas are processed properly, you stop mistaking movement for meaning. You stop chasing completion just to quiet the noise. You begin to notice that some ideas don't want to be finished. They want to be understood. And once they are, they stop asking for anything else. That's when your system stops feeling like pressure and starts feeling like support. Not because you're doing more, but because you're finally doing the right amount. This is why people often feel relief before they feel progress. Relief comes from resolution. Progress comes later. Processing gives you the first one, so the second doesn't feel forced. When ideas are understood, they stop competing with each other. They line up naturally. You don't have to manage them. You don't have to motivate yourself. You don't have to push. You simply respond. And that response feels quieter than most people expect. Not dramatic, not urgent, just clear. That clarity is what allows work to happen without friction, without the sense that something is being dragged forward before it's ready. That's the difference between movement that drains you and movement that sustains you. And this is where people usually notice the shift. Not because something new appears, but because something stops pulling at them. The mind isn't quieter because ideas are gone. It's quieter because they're finally accounted for. Nothing is being chased. Nothing is being avoided. There's simply a sense that things are where they belong. And that sense is what makes forward motion feel possible. That's the end of this weave. By the time an idea reaches this point, Something important has already happened. It has crossed a boundary. It left the mind. It found a place to rest. And it stayed there long enough for you to stop guarding it. That alone separates this idea from most of the thoughts you have. Most ideas never make it this far. They pierce through attention briefly, trigger a reaction, and dissolve before they ever arrive anywhere real. But this one arrived, and because it arrived, it changed your relationship to it. You're no longer trying to remember it. You're no longer worried about losing it. You're no longer checking in on it just to be sure. It exists independently of you now. That's the quiet shift most people miss. They think systems are about control, about order, about productivity, but systems only matter when they reduce responsibility. Capture reduced the mind's obligation to hold the idea. Containment reduced the need to monitor it. Processing reduced the pressure to act on it prematurely. Each step removed a different kind of tension, and when tension is removed, something else becomes possible. Discernment. You begin to notice which ideas carry weight and which ones only carried urgency. You stop treating everything as equally important simply because it appeared in your mind. You stop mistaking activity for movement. This is where flow actually starts to return, not because you're doing more, but because you're no longer doing things just to quiet the noise. Ideas that need action become obvious. They don't shout, they don't demand, they feel specific. Ideas that don't need action stop asking for it. They don't vanish, they simply lose their pull. That distinction is subtle, but it changes everything downstream. Work stops feeling reactive, decisions stop feeling rushed, momentum stops feeling forced. You're no longer pushing ideas forward just to relieve pressure. You're responding to them when they're ready. This is why most workflows fail even when they look well designed. They focus on speed before stability. They optimize output before clarity. They try to move ideas forward before those ideas know what they are. A real pipeline doesn't rush ideas. It creates conditions where movement is natural, where stillness isn't treated as failure, where release isn't treated as loss, where action isn't treated as obligation. Once those conditions exist, the rest becomes simple. Not easy, simple. What changes most at this stage isn't behavior, it's perception. You begin to feel the difference between ideas that are alive and ideas that were only loud. Alive ideas don't create pressure. They create direction. They don't multiply when ignored. They sharpen when given space. And because of that, you stop treating attention as something that has to be defended. You stop scanning for what you might be forgetting. You stop rehearsing ideas just to keep them from slipping away. Your system becomes a place ideas can wait without deteriorating. That waiting is important. It's where relevance reveals itself over time. It's where urgency fades and intention remains. Some ideas lose meaning when they sit, others gain it, and you don't have to decide which is which. You just have to let them be still long enough for the difference to show. This concludes this session. Let what you've heard settle before continuing.